The results and discussion sections are perhaps the two most important sections in any scientific paper. In the results section, you share the findings of your experiment, noting any significant outcomes and highlighting patterns in your data. Try to present your data in manageable chunks that are reader-friendly. It is helpful to use graphs and tables to illustrate patterns and connections in data. You should present your findings in the same order as you originally presented your research questions or objectives. The discussion section contains analysis and interpretation of the result. This is where you explain the findings to the reader. Here, you connect any significant findings or emergent patterns in your data to the theory you offered in the introduction. Your discussion section should follow the order of the results section, and you should clearly connect the findings to the research questions they answer. Some professors and academic journals require a combined results and discussion section, allowing for interpretation of the data as it is presented. This method of organization is more reader-friendly in research projects involving large amounts of quantitative data, because the analysis of the data is conducted and the connections to theory are made as the data is presented. If your results section stands alone, it should include your results and only your results. However, the elements required in this section are the same regardless. We will go over the benefits and structure of a combined results and discussion section at the end of this video. A major function of the results section is to break down the data into manageable chunks that show the relationship between the data collected and the research question or objectives. Essentially, you are using this section to prepare the reader for the discussion section, in which you will specifically interpret and evaluate the data as relates to research questions or objectives and the hypothesis. The results section should open with text summarizing the research questions, aims, or hypotheses. Then, begin to present your findings in the same order. The writing in this section should be unbiased and logical. Leave any interpretation or analysis for the discussion section, unless the two sections are combined. This section typically serves as an exploration of your data. It should include both tables and/or figures and text to walk the reader through the findings. When creating your tables and figures, include a descriptive title, caption, and any necessary legends or annotations to ensure that the reader can understand each element without reading the text. That is, if I skim your paper and look only at the tables, I should have a sense of what the numbers in each table mean, or what point each figure is communicating. The title should help me understand the relationship between all of the elements in the table. However, ensuring that you have complete and descriptive tables and figures does not mean that you can simply present them without context. Instead, they should be used as supporting evidence as you guide the reader through your findings. An effective way to begin to organize your data and effectively title your tables is to consider your research questions. As previously mentioned, each research question and the hypothesis that answers it highlights an important aspect of the data you collected. You can change your research questions into statements and use those to title your tables or figures. This makes it clear to the reader which table or figure addresses which research question. For example, let's say you are doing an experiment on electrolysis of water, and one of your research questions is which common household electrolyte is most effective at conducting electrical charge. One table heading you may consider is Electrical Conductivity of Common Household Electrolytes. That table title is brief, specific, and informative. Organize the presentation of your data in the same order in which your research questions or hypotheses were presented. If your results section stands alone, you should summarize the key findings of the experiment at the end. This will make for a smooth transition into the discussion section. Before we move on to the discussion section, let's take a moment to discuss some common mistakes students often make when preparing the results section. 1. Formatting errors. Different citation styles, and even different professors, present different requirements for the formatting of tables and figures, so it is incredibly important for you to know the rules of the citation style you are following. Something as simple as putting the title of a table or figure in the wrong place can cost you points. Typically, the title and number for a table are placed above the table, with any necessary notes below the table. In contrast, the title and number of a figure are placed below the figure, with the caption to follow. However, this is not the case with the 7th and most recent edition of APA, wherein the titles and numbers for both tables and figures are placed above the item. Be aware of the rules for the specific citation format that you are using. While we are discussing format, it is helpful to mention that when creating graphs for your paper, you shouldn't rely on colors alone to distinguish between different groups of data. Many professional journals and university printers only print in grayscale or black and white. Any tables you include should not be cut and pasted from Excel. Instead, use the format detailed in the report template or course guidelines. 2. Confusing or illogical organization. Present your results in the order in which your research questions, aims, or hypotheses were presented. Ensure that your tables and figures are numbered in the order in which they appear. This is simple to fix, but many students mislabel their tables or number them incorrectly. 3. Unnecessary information. If the results section is separate from the discussion section, do not include any information that does not present the direct findings or outcomes of your experiment in the results section. This includes information about methods of analysis, calculations, background in theory, and interpretation of your results. Typically, background in theory should be included in the introduction section, while methods of analysis are included in the materials and methods section. Depending on whether the calculations pertain more to theory and background or methods of analysis, calculations may be included in either the introduction section or the methods and materials section. Keep in mind that depending on the type of experiment you are conducting, some calculations may be included in the discussion section as well. If you are confused about where your calculations should be located, ask your professor for guidance. The purpose of the results section is to present your results. The purpose of the discussion section is to provide an interpretation of the results, so any analysis of those results should be contained in that section. It is also unnecessary to include pages and pages of raw data or several consecutive figures that address the same research question in the results section. In certain cases, it is acceptable to consolidate a small collection of graphs or diagrams into a single figure. Additionally, it may not be necessary to present a table of every single data point you collected. Instead, it might be more helpful to create a graph illustrating the trends in that data. When in doubt, ask your professor. The discussion section contains analysis and interpretation of the results of your experiment or study. This section should be very clearly written, highlighting the ways in which your results address your research questions and providing an explanation of any results that deviated from your initial expectations. The primary goal of this section is to help the audience understand the relevant relationships and patterns that emerged in your data through a guided interpretation. In this section, as you craft your explanations, feel free to incorporate and properly cite outside information to support your statements and refer back to the theory you outlined in the introduction. Like the results section, the discussion section should be organized in the same order your research questions were presented. The first part of your discussion section should provide a general reminder of what your findings were and why this study was important. In the next part, relate your main findings back to the hypothesis and indicate whether the data you collected supported or confirmed your hypothesis. Using the results as support and reminding readers to refer to relevant figures or tables as necessary, provide answers to your research questions. Show how the data indicates those answers. Don't just say, the hypothesis was confirmed. Use theory to support your explanations. You should discuss, not just state, differences between obtained and anticipated results. Briefly describe any unexpected findings in the order they appear in your results section, and provide a plausible explanation as to why they occurred. Once again, don't just say, the results were expected, or the experiment went well. If the experiment went well and the results were expected, identify potential sources of experimental error and describe what may have happened if those errors occurred. Note any flaws or limitations in your study. Were there any issues with the study that would prevent it from being generally applicable, such as a small sample size or unavailability of certain resources? If your professor provided any additional questions for you to answer, do so in this section. Just as some publications require you to combine the results and discussion section, it should be noted that some also eliminate the conclusion section, choosing instead to include the conclusions at the end of the discussion section. If a conclusion section is not required for your report, use the end of the discussion section to reiterate the most important outcomes of your research. Then, generalize your findings and provide information about the importance of these outcomes for the field as a whole. In some cases, if your study is incomplete, or if further studies would be helpful in providing a more robust understanding of your subject, you can make suggestions for further research. Remember that suggestions for further research can be provided in the discussion section or the conclusion section, but not both. Here are some common mistakes that students make when writing the discussion section. 1. Introducing new data. If your results section is separate, all new data should have been introduced in that section. Don't introduce any new quantitative information in the discussion section. 2. Conclusions not supported by results. Speculation. Only draw conclusions that can be supported by data and explained with theory. There is no place for speculation in a scientific paper. 3. Discussing tangential issues. Keep your discussion focused on your results, and only your results. Remember, the discussion section is where you answer the question, what do my results mean? And explain your data to the audience. As we discussed before, it is not likely that everyone reading your reports throughout your career will be subject matter experts in your field. You may be asked to prepare materials for managers, financiers, or even for the public. Individuals who are not familiar with data analysis may find reports that are heavy in quantitative data difficult to digest. To solve this issue, the results and discussion sections are typically combined in quantitative research. This structure is friendlier to the reader, as they are provided necessary context for the data as it appears. Additionally, it feels more natural to write, as it allows you to explain the significance of your research and connect it to theory alongside the presentation of your results. If the results and discussion sections are combined, you should open with text that summarizes the main findings of the lab. Your hypothesis will help you decide which results to highlight, as these are the results you will spend the most time analyzing. The other components are essentially the same as we discussed before, but this time, your interpretation and analysis is given as you present the results. All of the rules for tables and figures discussed in the results section video still apply. Using separate paragraphs, guide your reader through your findings and explain your tables and figures. However, do not force the reader to go through each data point you obtained in chronological order. In a combined results and discussion section, you should structure the paragraph so that the first sentence, the topic sentence, is a statement that highlights the primary concept or finding that readers should remember from that paragraph. You should communicate your interpretation and analysis using present tense language. Once you have created a clear scientific topic sentence, use past tense as you draw upon your research to support it. Feel free to use the results and data you obtained during the experiment as in-text support for this statement, and incorporate theory where necessary to clarify connections between the data and your interpretation. Do not delve into speculation, but focus on presenting important facts to your audience. As usual, you should ensure that you identify limitations of your study and explain potential sources of experimental error. If there are any unexpected results or inconsistencies in the data, discuss them. If this section becomes lengthy or you have different groups of data with different significance, use subsections to divide the results and discussion section into more digestible components. Each subsection should have a common theme and a clear focus, and be labeled with a header that clearly indicates that theme or focus. Next, let's take a look at a couple of examples from student work. These examples are lengthy, and this exercise will require you to pause the video and read each example. Here are the errors that I noticed. The explanation is written in very informal language. More precise scientific language should be used. The key observation is not clearly highlighted. The interpretation of the possible error seen in Figure 2 is not well explained or connected to theory. Strange looking is not a formal scientific description. Instead, the student should have used theory to explain how such an error could occur. Connection to theory is missing throughout this section. There are also some minor errors with proofreading. The figures in this section are poorly designed and missing captions and adequate labeling. When creating figures, there is generally no need for a title, as the caption should contain a description of the figure. Graph axes should be labeled. The tables here appear to be cut and pasted from Excel, lacking appropriate titles and labels. Additionally, there is a page break in the table shown. Tables should be appropriately formatted and numbered, titled, and labeled. Finally, when choosing how many significant figures to represent, try to maintain consistency. Here are a few things that the student did well. The student remembered to refer to the figure in the text and included a quantitative highlight. The graph can be understood when printed in black and white, and the font size chosen for the numbers is legible. Finally, the choice of significant figures for the numbers on the graph's axes is reasonable. Let's look at another example. Here are a few errors that I noticed. As in the previous example, it's hard to make comparisons across the three materials tested due to the construction of the graphs. Additionally, there are minor errors in the writing that could have been resolved by careful proofreading. Here is what this student did well. The key finding is clearly stated at the beginning of this section. The findings are explained and connected to theory. The graphs are understandable when printed in black and white, and the figures are appropriately numbered, labeled, and captioned. They are mentioned in the text and appropriately interpreted for the reader. The error discussion is specific and provides insight on the expected effects of the potential error sources on the data. Instead of blaming human error, the student used theory to explain the effect of the error. Here are the key points that a combined results and discussion section should include. The first paragraph should begin with text summarizing the main finding of the lab and using the hypothesis as a guide. Results should be presented in a manner that highlights the most important aspects and guides the reader's interpretation of the data. Results that are significant or unexpected are discussed rather than simply listed. Relationships between the expected outcome and the data obtained during the experiment should be discussed using theory from course material or outside sources, relating back to the introduction. Citations should be included and properly formatted according to the guidelines set forth by the professor or professional publication. If inconsistencies in the data arise, those inconsistencies should be noted in the text, and, if possible, potential causes of error should be identified. Other potential sources of experimental error should also be described, and the hypothetical impact of those errors on the data collected should be discussed. If you present any statistical data, be sure to confirm the validity of these results using the appropriate tests. Results obtained during experimentation should be discussed in past tense, while the interpretation and discussion of those results should be conducted in present tense. Be sure to pay attention to formatting as well. Titles for tables and figures should be placed in the proper location according to the chosen citation style, typically above tables and below figures. Tables and figures should include enough detail in the form of captions, headers, or notes so that they can be understood by the reader without reading the text of the paper. Titles and captions should be succinct and descriptive, and there should be no unnecessary articles such as a or the at the beginning of the caption. The formatting of tables and figures should follow the guidelines set forth by the professor or professional publication. You should answer any additional questions posed by the professor in this section and include cited references to outside material where appropriate. If there is no conclusion section required for this report, conclusions should be provided at the close of this section. Now that you have learned how to properly format both the results and discussion sections, let's learn how to write an effective conclusion section.